Welcome, everyone. I'm going to get started. Welcome to our In the Design Studio conversation, Dressers, Dresses, and Dressing. What can sustainable furniture, fashion, and food learn from each other? This marks New York City's third Refashion Week, sponsored by the Sanitation Foundation and Donate NYC. And we're proud that this year we have the first ever Redesign Day track within Refashion Week. Both share New York City's goal of sending zero waste to landfill by 2030, challenging New Yorkers to imagine a world in which all products, including furniture and furnishings, are made, consumed, shared, and remade sustainably. Redesign Day is curated by Mebel Transforming Furniture, where I work. Mebel was founded to pursue an ideal, the seamless integration of beauty and sustainability in furniture. We aspire to 5 boroughs and a world that reimagines waste as a resource, used materials becoming gorgeous new furniture. As you can see in this slide, we have a couple of examples with a grand orange chair reimagined out of recycled metal barrels, some pastel-colored chairs crafted from defective eyeglasses, lunch trays, and other reclaimed plastic, and a pair of classic wooden chairs built of old beams from a dismantled barn. So this is part of Redesign Day, and that will conclude later with a fun game show today at 4 p.m., which I'll tell you about at the end of this session. To start this session, I wanted to introduce you to our guests. I'm honored to introduce you to Malika Leiper, who is a former chef and manager at Buvette in the West Village. She's also a researcher, storyteller, and strategist. Ngozi Okaro, who's the founder and executive director of Custom Collaborative, and Jonsara Ruth, who's the co-founder and design director of the Parsons Healthy Materials Lab. She's also a designer, artist, and founder of Salty Labs. And I'm Mona Chan from Mebel Transforming Furniture. We'll share a link to their bios at the end of this session, so you can read a little bit more about them. So we brought these 3 change makers together today to explore their journeys and aspirations in sustainable food, fashion, and furniture. We also hope to uncover lessons that these sectors can borrow from each other for a more sustainable future. I'm going to start us off with a few questions, but in the spirit of learning across sectors, I know that our guests have questions they'd like to pose to each other as well. Feel free to put questions in the question section at any point in the discussion, and I'll do my best to field them during or towards the end of the conversation. And one logistical point, you can also put any tech questions or issues into the chat and use the questions tab for questions. So let's start with situating you in your fields, Jonsara, Ngozi, and Malika, your fields of sustainable fashion, food, and furniture. How have you been tackling sustainability through your work, and what is your approach? Let's start with Ngozi.
Thank you, Mona. I'm really excited to be here, to be part of this day, Refashion Week, and excited to be here with Malika and Jonsara to hear their ideas and projects as well. So at Custom Collaborative, we focus on sustainability in a way that's interconnected with human rights and environmental sustainability. So living wage work is very much central to our work in sustainability. In terms of the materials aspect, we use exclusively like upcycled and dead stock pre-consumer waste. We also even our equipment is used. We buy it used or it's donated to us. And we try to operate on a zero waste platform. So basically, we have a bin for scraps that are like 5 inches by 5 inches, but that's the smallest piece that can escape use. And in addition to how we produce, we also teach to all of the women who are participants in our program. We teach them as many factors of sustainability, as many methods as we know. And I'll put our address in the chat window so people can go and learn more about the Custom Collaborative.
Thanks, Ngozi. Malika.
Hi, everyone. Well, it's World Wildlife Day today, and we're also approaching, or we're in March, which is International Women's Month. So it's great to be here in a panel of all women. I started off in food when I graduated from college. I went to Columbia after spending half of my life in Cambodia. And I entered food really because it's a passion of mine. I began working at Buvette right when it opened in 2013 as a prep cook, and making my way up into eventually managing the restaurant, traveling to Paris to open a new restaurant and train new staff. And I was also involved in other related projects to the restaurant. And then I took a very different turn and went to grad school to study urban planning. And a lot of people asking me, food and cities, how are those connected? And I began to learn. I had a feeling they were connected. I didn't have the words yet to describe just how. And since graduating, I've really become to able to see how food is so essential to the growth of cities. Without food, we wouldn't be able to feed the people living in cities. Food is health, food is economic development, food is culture. And coming from a place like Cambodia, which was in the 90s when we were growing up, recovering from genocide, this notion of sustainability was deeply ingrained in me from a social standpoint, thinking about how we set in place institutions and cultural values and systems that last over time and connect people and ensure that they're healthy. And so sustainability as a lens has always permeated everything that I've done.
Yeah, I'll just echo the words of Ngozi and of Malika to just say I'm so thrilled to be here. And thank you, Mona, for inviting us. I just really respect the work that you're both doing, and I'm really excited to hear more during this hour. It's really amazing. In terms of how I approach sustainability, really, in everything I do, and I'll speak for the Healthy Materials Lab at Parsons as well, is placing people at the center of everything that we do. And so if we think about the way that the world or the things that we make as designers or architects affect people, then we make choices based on that issue. So, and that goes anywhere from like how the materials that we build with can affect our human bodies and our health, or the health of, but even in the production of materials or the production of furniture, for instance, or the production of food or fashion, how in the production process, people who are making the things are affected by the things by the materials that they're using. And obviously, I think a big understanding of sustainability kind of in the mainstream market is how what we do affects the planet. So I appreciate today's World Wildlife Day. That's great. And I think that the protecting the biodiversity of our planet is essential. And so everything that is affecting human health is also affecting the health of all kinds of living beings on this planet. So that's a very big broad spectrum, and I'm sure we'll get to the more specifics as we speak.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, thank you. And you've all touched a little bit on this already of how you got involved in the community, but I'd love to hear more, and why this is important to you. Maybe I'll start with Malika.
Sorry, Mona, can you repeat? You were a little low, I think.
Okay. How did each of you get involved in this journey, and why is it important to you?
Yeah, so my parents obviously had a big impact on me. My mother is an activist. She was the Minister of Women's Affairs in Cambodia, was an opposition party member. She championed women's rights and was a member of parliament for several terms. And so thinking about her career as a politician and how it affected me as her daughter, we didn't always get along so well, I would say, because her project of democracy always took her away from me rather. But where we did come together always was food. I have wonderful memories of her cooking in the times that she was around, and it was something that we could really bond together on. So coming to New York, where I've now been for 12 years, I loved culture, and it seemed like all of the culture I was looking for happened in the cafes and restaurants and in street life. And when I started working in restaurants, I was really interested in the different cultural values that we bring to a space like a restaurant, thinking about all of the different exchange of diverse peoples, just from the staff and also including the customers. And then, you can continue to widen your perspective and think about, well, how does a restaurant fit within a larger landscape of a system like a city? And so in my urban planning work that I've been doing, I've been consulting really around public spaces. I consider restaurants a public space, especially now with COVID-19, when we see them out on the streets more than ever. And so I've been really interested in how design and our design of spaces relates to the public. And I'll leave it at that for now. Let the others go.
Yeah, it's great. It's thinking about it in terms of public space and culture. Jonsara, what has been your journey? How did you get involved in this, and why is it important to you?
Yeah, I had read a little prompt and I had a story to tell, but then hearing Malika, I realized that I could tell a different story, which is it actually is related to food and also related to my parents, who made a decision right before I was born to kind of get off the grid in a way. I mean, we had electricity and running water, but actually not when I was born. They moved quickly to a place that had electricity and running water right after I was born. But they really made a decision in their 70s to try living off the land and being, more self-sufficient. And, I think it was coming off of the 60s and the political unrest, and they were young during that time and thought, let's just take this into our own hands. And so we had an organic garden where we grew most of our food. We were vegetarian, so we mostly lived off of that land. But my job in the house was to take out the organic garbage, the compost, which I hated. I hated that job. And in fact, I didn't really want to live on this farm. I wanted to live in New York City. I really didn't like any of it. But what I realized much later was that compost heap, understanding that compost heap was the nutrients that were going to make, were the nutrients that was going to make our food, our dinner, where, eventually that would go to the garden and nourish the soil to make the food that we were going to eat. And that kind of understanding of that circularity, which what we call now circularity. But at that time, it's just like the garbage will, the compost will help feed us, that really has, is instrumental in the way I think. Even though, as soon as I could get out of the house, I went to a city, and I've lived in cities ever since. I think that kind of circular system has really impacted me. And, I think in terms of design, and, I grew, I think I was born wanting to draw, and then I studied design in undergraduate and studied architecture in my graduate studies. And design has been what I have been drawn to my whole life. But so within design, how does that apply? And I think, I was very anxious to make design democratic, to make it affordable from the very beginning. And I had watched the Bauhaus, in Germany, had that same idea in the 30s, and making good design accessible so I had this kind of idea, like, I want to do that. And so I started designing furniture for the masses. I designed furniture. It wasn't my name on the furniture. It was Martha Stewart's name on the furniture originally. But what it did, I got to go to the factories where we were making this furniture for mass production to be sold around the world and relatively inexpensively. And I poured my heart and soul into that, to each detail of those designs to make it be beautiful in people's homes. But then I realized that the people who were living around the factory were getting polluted air. They were living in really strange conditions, that were not healthy. And I felt personally responsible, and it changed everything for me. I stopped working I stopped doing that shortly after that experience, and instead tried to ask myself, like, how can I do my passion but not negatively impact other people or the planet that we live on. And so I went into a deep dive of trying to learn how to make, well, in that case, how do I parlay my experience in manufacturing furniture to being healthier? And so we joined a small group of people called Q Collection to design mass manufactured furniture that's healthier and made in America, so that we could support the kind of culture of making in this country and support that kind of, that piece of culture. I think is really important, that we have more people who know how to make things, who have the knowledge here. So that's a little bit about how I got involved in, more chapters in the future.
Before we go to Ngozi, I see there's a question in the chat from Miles. With COVID-19 and its variant, how do we ensure that recycled materials are safe to reuse? Maybe, Jonsara, you could talk a little bit about that with your work through Healthy Materials Lab.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a complex answer. It's not a simple answer, because actually this was my answer to a future question that Mona might ask, which is like, what are the mistakes you've made in the past? And I think, when I began, I thought, recycling is great. I don't want to create any more waste. Let's just recycle everything and make new things out of old things. And that's the way we do it. But, and I think Ngozi might have answers to this as well, but there's a complicated issue there, because some things, like, for instance, rubber tires, when they are recycled, become more toxic than they were when they were a virgin tire, for instance. So there's manufacturers who are trying to do good, who are saying, let's take this material, recycle it, make it into a new product, and then use it. And then there's certifiers who said, well, you know what? We're going to give you the stamp of approval because of that. We're going to give you an extra certification. You recycled something and you took it out of the landfill. But in fact, what happened was that these recycled tires became tiles, and then they became used in playgrounds, for instance. And then children are exposed to the emissions or the fumes from these recycled tires, and then they get asthma. And so actually recycling isn't always a great thing. And, I think it's an interesting question tying it to COVID in a way, because we're wasting lots of things. I mean, I can't, on every walk I take every day, I'm sure this is true for everybody, we see masks, just everywhere. And, we're using more and more cleaning products and more and so what do we do with all this waste? And it's true, it's true. It's a big question. Yeah. I mean, it can be good too. And maybe Ngozi wants to answer some of that.
Yes, it's a great question. And I think if we can look at it through the perspective of COVID-19, and so I'll just say that for clothing, whether the clothing is made from upcycled materials or from new materials, a piece of clothing is in the hands of dozens of people before it gets to the consumer, right? So there's the many people who create the textiles, then there's the transportation, then there's someone who sews the shoulder seams, and then there's the person who negotiates the sewing of the buttons. And so everything is touched by a lot of people in any event. I'm a germaphobe. So that kind of, I have gotten myself past that. But one of the things that's really important for clothing, and especially right now, particularly mask, is when you receive it to wash it beforehand. But I'm just saying, in the context of clothing, at least how Custom Collaborative creates sewn goods, there is nothing different about the materials that we use from materials that are used in any other type of clothing, because the waste that we use, it's pre-consumer waste, so it would have gone to the landfill without being in anyone's hands. And that said, continue to wash your things before you use them. So there's that. And then I just want to say, Jonsara, I appreciate you talking about how much waste there is now in this COVID era. The amount of paper masks that I see on the streets is just amazing. And so, if this is my request for everyone to buy reusable masks and reuse them and wash them, particularly cotton masks. Or other natural fibers. And then also, just to say, to follow on what Jonsara said, the synthetic materials and then the process of recycling and upcycling synthetics releases most times more toxins and microfibers into the water stream and into the airstream. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, yeah. It is complicated, the recycling. And luckily, there are experts who manage that. But I wanted to come back to the other question and then talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic, since that was brought up. But I wanted to check in with Ngozi and ask you if you why this is important to you and how you got involved in the journey.
Yes, great question. I have always been an environmentalist, and I've always been a women's rights activist. Um, and Custom Collaborative is emerging of those two things, and then also my work and interest in community and economic development. I have some of my clothes made by people, individual tailors and dressmakers. And one woman was doing particularly good work for me. And so I went to Mariama exclusively, and she would always charge me lower and lower prices for the clothing. I think because she liked me, and people would always ask where could they get this clothing. And I would tell them and then go through the process. And so it was challenging for folks. And so I started thinking in 2014 about how to merge the skill sets that she had with people's needs, and what were people willing to pay, right? And I did some market research, and people were willing to pay, women were willing to pay $400 to $500 for a dress that I was paying $80 for. And so to me, that seemed to be a perfect place to merge both the needs of like people who want clothes that fit and affirm their bodies, and people who can make these clothes and earn a living wage at them, at making these clothes, and then folded in the environment by deciding that we would use only like ethical fabrics. We would not buy fabrics that were polluting, and that we would try to source all of our fabric from dead stock, meaning fabric that fashion companies or mills decided not to use, maybe something they thought it wasn't the right color, or maybe there was just too much of it. And so that's basically what all of our creations are made of. So if somebody goes on our website to purchase, there's probably like 4 or 5 of any given thing. And then we sell it out, people love it, and then that's that. So just to round things out, Custom Collaborative exists to support no and low wage women developing careers in sustainable fashion. We have a training program, a business incubator, and a cooperative development arm. And so we have a worker cooperative, Fashion Networks Production. And so they produce sewn goods for small and emerging designers. And in fact, I don't know if Malika has shared it, but she and I met around cooperative, and she had done some work studying a sewn goods cooperative in Cambodia, I think.
Yeah, I'll say a few more words about that. Yeah, Ngozi and I met at Harvard in a class taught by Professor Lily Song about community development. And so as I was doing my research looking at the garment sector in Cambodia, Ngozi was brought as a guest speaker, and we were able to meet. And what a wonderful turn of events that we're now here together on this panel. The world is smaller than we think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. As my mother was a garment worker, your projects speak a lot to me. I wanted to come back, prompted by the question from Miles about the pandemic, and how has the pandemic shifted your beliefs, your understanding and goals around sustainability? Jonsara, you want to start? Yes.
Sure. I mean, it's such a horrific thing what's happening for so many people, and so many lives lost, and so many suffering, and so many evictions, and so there's so much remorse. And at the same time, I think that the pandemic has revealed some amazing things about human nature. And so I don't know, in my family we keep saying, well, there's a silver lining, here's another silver lining. But one of the things in terms of sustainability that I've experienced that's very positive is that part of the work that we do at Healthy Materials Lab, or that I'm trying to do as a designer, is to say, what, things can get better. I'm optimistic, like things can get better. We can use healthier materials. We can support low and no income workers. I mean, what Ngozi is doing to train these people is incredible. Pulling, there's good things that can happen. But, in terms of climate change, it's very daunting. We have 9 years till 2030 where we have to change our behaviors so that the emissions can lower, the greenhouse gas emissions can lower, so that we can live longer on this planet. And the outlook at the end of 2019 was looking horrible. And then, of course, the shutdowns happened, and then we saw the skies clear up, and we saw everybody who's lucky enough to still have a job shift to this way of communicating, and work continues, and really good work happens. And so, the fact that human nature can shift so rapidly in 2 weeks, in March of 1 year ago, at least in America, right? So in America, that's when our shutdown happened. But within a few weeks, we were teaching and learning online. We were working online. We were getting used to a new way of doing things. And now we're a year in and the world didn't collapse. Like, we're still doing things, and, things are moving forward. And so I think that's really the promise that I see, is that from the pandemic, is that human behavior can shift. We need human behavior to shift in order to be successful with a sustainable new world. And it's hard to always imagine that shift can happen with billions of people, but we just made it happen. As a united front, as a global united front, we've just made a huge shift in a very, very short amount of time. So it gives me hope that we can make these other shifts in behavior to make a more sustainable future.
So I have a thought about that question, if it's okay.
Yeah.
I have been thinking about this for several months, and one of kind of my hypothesis is that in order to become really to create the sustainability that we need to save the planet, that sustainability really has to travel directly through a lens of racial justice. So if we continue to operate under a white supremacist ideology, then we're not thinking about the majority of the world, and we're trying to figure out what will really support our corner. And that's not going to be enough to change the world. And so when I say that I think that sustainability needs to go through a racial justice framework or lens, when we prioritize clean water and safe water in New York City and New York suburbs on the same level as we prioritize clean water in Flint, then we'll actually be doing the work. But if we decide, oh, we only need to have clean in this part because this is where we are, or we just need to build seawalls, around New York City, and we're not as focused on Jackson, Mississippi, or some of the other places, then we're not really going to figure it out. And so we have to imagine that we are all, as humans and all animals, equal, and we deserve equitable frameworks and access to water and air.
Yeah, Ngozi, thanks for saying that. And Bell Hooks describes the system as a white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, even to, to complicate it even further. And that has a hierarchy. And what we're all talking about is really empathy. And so what the pandemic, I think, has opened our eyes to is that, we all matter. And in fact, the people who are the most marginalized are experiencing the worst effects of this pandemic. Even though we like to say that we're all in this together, there are people who have it much, much worse. And so I think a lot of this is about empathy building, and part of what being under lockdown has helped me realize, at least, is not being able to travel and being kind of stuck within my one neighborhood or just the city of New York. You start to see how interconnected we all are, and it becomes a lot harder to ignore things when you're in one place, and when things slow down. And so that's where, as Jonsara was saying, I see a lot of optimism in our ability to continue to drive these positive behaviors forward. that said, we're only 1 year into this, and that's a really short time. So a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, thank you. It looks like you've been answering a question that came in through the chat as well about how we're connecting privilege and white supremacy to sustainability. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more to that, or I also know you each have questions for each other. And want to jump in with a question of your own for the others on the call. Well, one of the things that we talked about in our prep call was about how we're we're so looking for instant gratification, food, fashion, and furniture, and it even goes across furniture, as Jonsara was saying, where we want to redecorate our rooms constantly, and get the latest outfits and follow the trends, and fast food just dominates our culture in so many ways. And it was interesting as we were talking about that before the call, how that's all connected, this idea of fast and instant gratification. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think food and capital are so connected. Without growing food at the industrial scale that we do now, people would still be, vast number of people would still be working on the land. But now we have a class of workers who are earning wages, who can buy fast fashion and cheap things. And so I think understanding how interconnected that system is, once you see that, you can then step out of it and realize, wait, I'm like a hamster on a wheel, and I can choose, I can make better choices and not consume things that are making me unhealthy, but also making the world, the planet unhealthy. We talked about addiction too, and how these behaviors of fast food are and consumption are addictive, and they're designed to be addictive, actually, intentionally so. And you can see that very clearly in the food industry. And for example, how when Michelle Obama was trying to introduce healthier food, she faced in school lunches for children, she faced so much pushback from food lobbyists, because there's money to be made in food, and in cheap food rather. So continuing to be able to see those connections helps us to be able to step back and see better ways that we can, and better choices we can make.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such a good point. I mean, the thing about addiction we talked about, and I think goes across, the addictive food and the addictive fashion piece for fast fashion, and even this addiction to getting new things for our spaces, they can interior design market and the furniture, the manufacturing of things for the home has skyrocketed during the pandemic. Like, there's all these other sectors of the economy that have plummeted, but you can't make enough furniture or enough, enough kind of home DIY redecorating things. But the real, if this is really going to be the word sustainable gets tossed around so much, and I actually don't use it very much because of that. But if we mean by the true definition of how do we make something long lasting, sustainable, like long lasting, then it absolutely has to be accessible. But then the question, and again, a complexity, is if it's accessible, if it's affordable, does that continue that cycle of disposal And how do we counter that disposability culture that the United States is definitely a big part of, and at the same time make it affordable and accessible? Because, you know, that goes to the point, Ngozi, that you're saying that, you know, of course there's white privilege that's driving all of this, and that's undermining in a big way. And anyway, the accessibility piece is this big question, affordability, and yet without disposal. Like, you know, how do we break that? How do we crack that egg?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when we were talking about the addictive nature of like the people's food purchases and like the shopping and you know, fast fashion, fast food, even fast furniture, right? You know, I myself reflected on, okay, what did I buy during pandemic? Lots of lipsticks. And one of my colleagues told me, he's like, yeah, there you do have an email saying that you can get like 4 of these lipsticks for $50, but you already have all of these colors that you picked out, right? And so for me, I bought them still, but for me, I had to think about like, what was it that I was actually looking for? And so I think what I wanted was something that I would love, maybe something that would love me. And it seemed like in the moment, oh, this Merlot lipstick will do it because the Cabernet lipstick didn't do it, right? But I think sometimes it's so hard to connect to what it is that we're seeking and what it is that we're wanting and needing, that it's very easy to just say like, oh, I can just click on and buy this thing. Because when I bought those lipsticks, I didn't think about the fact that, you know, the companies that produce them didn't have any type of buyback project or any way to like recycle these things, right? That I'll use these things and then I'm just still contributing to waste. I think I just thought about like, oh, this is cute, I'll feel happy. And that click made me happy. And then when it arrived in the mail, that made me happy. When I opened the box, that made me happy. But we have like these fleeting moments of happiness that are not nearly the same as looking at like a suit jacket that I have that was my grandmother's, that's at least like 60 or 70 years old. So I think that in so many ways, we have been told by the marketing that this thing will make us feel good. And again, this thing, whether it's like the fast food that, you know, has all types of like empty calories and no nutritional value, or the fast fashion, which was made of suspect materials, and both of which were made probably by people who were underpaid. Like all of that doesn't factor into our thinking, but we have to figure out like how to include that in our cost benefit analysis of, do I want this thing? Is it feeding me? Is it feeding the earth? Is it helpful? Is it good?
So important. I jump as you're saying all of that. It's so provocative, you know, because you're describing your own, you know, what we all experience, right? Like what's going to make me happy right now, because it's hard to be happy these days, especially. But then, you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about ingredients, you know, because if we go back maybe this is segue to Malika, but, you know, if we go back to understanding where the ingredients come from to make the things that we're making, and then we ask not only what are the ingredients, but where do they come from, and how are they grown or mined or, you know, processed in the beginning, we can start to answer a lot of these, you know, these questions about whether actually it just not answer a question, but actually let it help us make a choice. Let it help us determine a decision. And and when I ask those questions, it slows me down. You know, I mean, not it slows me down because it takes a lot of work to get the answers, but also then you like question your own desire nature. Like, oh wait, do I really need to do that if I know that it's, you know, coming from this place or another place? And you know, the ingredients piece is so deep. It's such a rich like you were saying earlier, that synthetic can get into the microfibers from the synthetic can get into our water system, and then all of a sudden we drink that water, or the fish we eat drink that water, and then we have plastics inside of us. Like, if we didn't have that ingredient, if it was linen or cotton or natural hemp or some other kind of natural material, it would have biodegraded. So, but this the food piece is relying on the same. I don't know. I'm curious, Malika.
Well, I was just thinking about. I was actually thinking about architecture and how these days so many people want to become architects. So many people want to build buildings, or fashion. So many people want to enter fashion and create clothes, or people want to open restaurants. And sometimes maybe the best thing is not to do anything at all. You think not to discourage anyone from not pursuing their passion, but it's just a provocation, just like Ngozi, your decision to buy those lipsticks. We have to stop and question, should I really bring more into this world that will then potentially be disposed, and maybe not in the most friendly way. So not to say that I'm going to stop eating or buying clothes or doing what I do, but I think there is value in doing less or not doing.
Well, my middle schooler who just had to apply to high schools and wanted to quit society altogether because of it said would be very happy to hear that. But I was thinking about the synthetics and the materials, Jonsara, that you were saying, and we talked about how we're looking to have less artificial ingredients now in food, right? We have Haagen-Dazs that is selling an ice cream that only has 5 ingredients now. I think it's Haagen-Dazs, or another ice cream brand that only has 5 ingredients in, and that's their branding. But we don't even think about that for clothing or furniture or design, like what is going into our sofas and all of the different fibers and processes for fashion. And I'm not saying that we're doing so well in food either, but when we think about what's going into everything we consume, it's there's so much we don't know and aren't following the trail back to. We have a question. This kind of builds on that. From Samantha, how do we combat consumerism and have businesses encourage consumers to place value in buying minimally and ethically?
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge question, right? I think, that's a big question. And, like the quick answer that a lot of folks talk about is buy things to last. Durable, good things that last a long time. And if we look at my grandparents, saved up and bought their furniture, their living room furniture set that would last them the next 55 years. It was a whole different idea of the way that you invest. And I can't say that they were just smart. It's not that they were any smarter than anybody else. It's just the fast furniture thing wasn't even available to them at that point. Like, the choice was you buy a durable thing and then you pass it down generation to generation. And but then again, we get to the accessibility piece. Like, why should some people be able to do that and other people not? And that's inequitable. Anyway, I'm curious about the fashion piece too. Tailor-made clothes is amazing. And I don't know, do we buy just a couple things? Do we have smaller closets and have less and better quality and less things? Or I don't know, what do you think?
I mean, that's what I prefer, to have better quality and fewer. So like, I have a pair of pants that I had made to match a suit. So this is a while ago. Um,
When we
probably
wore pants, you know.
exactly. Like 12 years ago. And I love those black pants. And I can just think about how many other black pants I've gone through during that same time period, because I was like, oh, I need a pair of black pants, one different pair of black pants. Um, Secret, I've gained weight, so that one pair of black pants doesn't always fit me. So then I juggle those. But I think it is possible to buy fewer things and actually spend less money in the aggregate, because they're things that one will have for a long time. And I also think that it's possible to for the things that are actually already made and that are already sold by companies, I think it's possible that, I know it's possible that they could pay more money to the people who are making them. It's possible that they could use better quality materials than what they're using, and they could still make money. Right. So that all of that's a possibilities. And so I like to hold open, like, what are the possibilities in the world? There's not necessarily just going to be one solution, because, right, everybody can't necessarily afford to like save for 3 months and then buy one thing. And I think that there's also some things on the horizon that will be more popular. So like made to measure, because frankly, a lot of clothes that people buy don't fit, right? And so then you're forced to buy something else or try something else. And we keep, going in search of something. I think that, the made to measure and made to order, I think that those will both help shift how things are made and sold and give people more options.
Yeah. And we have lots of comments in the chat. I'll just read a couple of them too, including thanks for your thoughtful answers. Is there a lens on food for this consumer minimalism? Is it sustainable to renovate an interior space based on aesthetic rather than durability and function? How does aesthetic provide the ability to feed the soul? We should move to capsule wardrobes, 25 to 27 max pieces, including shoes. And that also simplifies dressing. And you can renovate an interior space with less materials and still update it, like using concrete slab floor instead of adding broadloom carpet or vinyl flooring on top. So many more. Clean and safe options provided publicly means fewer costly plastic-filled alternatives owned by the private sector. Social and racial justice are essential to achieving sustainability. What's your favorite successful example of this? So we have only a few minutes left, and I just wanted to read some of those. But if you have, would you each like to comment on any of those points? Thank you, everyone, for sharing.
I'll just give my take on the food aspect and consumerism, also around practices that I think have been successful. I think there's a way to consume that is more ethical and provides better outcomes for the environment. For sure, there are models out there, and these two women on the panel are a testament to that. One thing I would say is that the closer, and this is where food can provide some learning teachings, is the closer you get to the land, the more sustainable it is. So the closer the product is to you, so buying local, doing the research at least into the things that you buy that aren't local. For example, the rice that you buy, I'll bring up a company in Cambodia called Ibis Rice that is introducing sustainable farming practices around rice, while at the same time sustaining traditional livelihoods and protecting a area of land that is the natural habitat to the giant ibis bird, which is it's a species that is going extinct. And so all of those things, and the rice is actually the best rice I've ever tasted. So you can, I think, you can hit all of those things, and it's a matter maybe not about the consumer side, but more the producer side and the business model, and how do we make the bottom line not just profits, but a sustainable future for everyone in the system.
Ngozi or Jonsara?
Actually, like what Malika said.
Okay. We're running out of time, but I wanted to just highlight a couple of things that were said by all of. There are so many great points that you that the three of you made, and those in our chat. But I wanted to just highlight maybe one thing that each of you said that ring true to me. It's hard to disconnect what we are wanting from what we are needing. Rather, during the pandemic, I bought an array of colors of lipstick for fleeting moments of happiness. Marketing reinforces those decisions based on what's going to make me happy. Jonsara, I came to understand what we now call circular systems. Today's garbage, which I hated carrying outside, are the nutrients for tomorrow's food. And Malika, thanks for quoting bell hooks on describing our current system as interconnected white supremacy, capitalist, and patriarchy. And I just wanted to close out on those a few notes. There were so many more wonderful comments from all of you, and I've learned from each of you. Thank you, Jonsara, Malika, and Ngozi. I'm so inspired by all of you, and I've learned more about what we can all do for a more sustainable future. I wanted to remind you all that we have a couple more events for ReDesign Day. The game show, where we'll have lots of fun at 4 o'clock today. Please also visit the virtual marketplace where you can visit some of our furniture and design partners. That's also part of Refashion Week. Refashion Week events are going on all week, and I do want to thank our sponsors of Refashion Week, Sanitation Foundation and Donate NYC. Thank you to the New York Adventure Club for your tech support. And I have to thank Danya Rubinstein-Markovitz for being the mastermind of all things behind the scenes. She's been helping us enormously with all of our slides and prep. And you can find the bios and resources in the chat tab now if you'd like to see the bios for our speakers and learn more about what they're doing, and some of the other speakers for ReDesign Day. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you again, Jonsara, Malika, and Ngozi. It was wonderful to spend this hour with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
great
you.
To chat. It was great to hear you guys. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mona, for hosting us.
Yes, you're a great host, great moderator.
Yes, and the Sanitation Foundation. It means so much that the city is leading the way in these initiatives. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, ditto on that. Underscoring
Yes.
the Sanitation Foundation. Awesome.
Yes, thank you, Sanitation Foundation, Neville, and everybody in the audience.